The blood-red sunrise cast long shadows across the arid landscape, as Beatrice Montgomery stared at her father's freshly dug grave. The reality of her inheritance, 500 acres of untamed Texas soil weighing on her shoulders like the shovel in her calloused hands. Porterville, Texas, 1878, was no place for a woman alone, but at 22, Beatrice had little choice but to fight for what was rightfully hers or lose everything her father had sacrificed to build. "Miss Montgomery," Sheriff Parker's voice startled her from her grief. "I hate to disturb you at such a time, but there are matters we need to discuss regarding your father's property." Beatrice turned, wiping the dust from her face with the back of her hand. "What matters, Sheriff? My father's will was clear. The land is mine now." The older man shifted uncomfortably, his weathered face apologetic beneath his gray mustache. "There's been some confusion, miss. According to town records, your father still owed taxes. If they aren't paid by harvest, the bank will claim the land." Beatrice felt her throat tighten. "How much?" $200. The sum hung in the air between them like a death sentence. $200 might as well have been $2,000 to a woman with barely $10 to her name. "I understand if you wish to sell, Miss Montgomery. There are interested parties who would. I will not sell." Beatrice's voice was steady despite the panic rising within her. "This land was everything to my father. It will be everything to me." Sheriff Parker sighed, tipping his hat. "You have until October, then. Good day, Miss Montgomery." As he mounted his horse and rode away, Beatrice turned back to the modest farmhouse that had been her home for the past 5 years. Since moving from Boston after her mother's death, she had learned much about farming from her father, but never enough to work the land alone. The next morning, Beatrice rose before dawn, donned her father's old trousers beneath her skirt, and headed to the fields. The spring planting couldn't wait, not if she hoped to harvest enough to pay those taxes. She struggled with the plow, her slight frame inadequate against the unyielding soil. 3 hours of backbreaking effort yielded only a few yards of shallow furrows. At this rate, she would need months to prepare even a quarter of the fields. Sweat soaked her blouse as she collapsed against the plow handle, fighting back tears of frustration. "You're going to break that plow before you break the ground that way, madam." Beatrice whirled around to find a tall figure silhouetted against the morning sun. As he stepped closer, she made out a lean man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the Texas sky. His clothes were dusty but well kept, marking him as a working man rather than one of the drifters that frequently passed through Porterville. "I didn't ask for your opinion, sir," she replied, straightening her back despite the ache in her muscles. He smiled, removing his hat to reveal sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Luke Vaughn, madam, just rode in from San Antonio way, looking for work. I cannot afford to hire help, Mr. Vaughn. Couldn't help but notice you're struggling with that plow." He gestured toward the field. "I've worked land from Texas to Kansas. I could show you how to set the blade right." Beatrice hesitated. Pride told her to send him on his way, but practicality won out. "Very well, Mr. Vaughn. Show me." Luke approached the plow, examining it with practiced hands. "Good iron, just needs adjustment." He worked quickly, resetting the angle of the blade. "Your father teach you to farm?" "Yes." "How did you know this was my father's land?" "Word travels fast in small towns. Heard about Joseph Montgomery's passing at the saloon last night. My condolences." "Thank you," Beatrice said stiffly, uncomfortable with this stranger knowing her business. Luke finished with the plow and stepped back. "Try it now." Beatrice positioned herself behind the handles, and to her surprise, the blade cut through the soil with half the resistance she'd fought earlier. The furrow it created was deeper, more even. "That's much better," she admitted grudgingly. You still won't manage alone, Luke observed. 500 acres is a two-man job at minimum. Beatrice wiped sweat from her brow. As I said, Mr. Vaughn, I cannot afford to hire help. What if we made a deal? Luke leaned against the plow. I need a place to stay, work to do. You need help with this land. I'll work for room and board, plus a small share of whatever we harvest. Why would you accept such terms when you could find paid work elsewhere? Luke's expression grew serious. Let's just say I've been drifting too long, looking to put down roots somewhere. This seems as good a place as any. Beatrice studied him carefully. There was something in his eyes, a quiet determination, perhaps even desperation that resonated with her own circumstances. Still, caution prevailed. 1 week, she decided. We'll try for 1 week. The bunkhouse behind the barn is yours, but I warn you, Mr. Vaughn, any trouble and you're gone. Yes, madam. He tipped his hat, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. We'd best get back to plowing then. Daylight's wasting. Luke took control of the plow, his strength making the work look effortless. Beatrice watched, both relieved and irritated by the ease with which he accomplished what had nearly defeated her. You can prepare the seed bags, he suggested. We'll need corn and wheat if you're hoping for a good profit. I know what crops to plant, Mr. Vaughn, she replied sharply. His grin was infuriating. Never suggested otherwise, Miss Montgomery. By sunset, they had plowed more land than Beatrice could have managed in a week alone. She cooked a simple meal of beans and cornbread, which they ate on the porch in tired silence. Your father built a good house, Luke commented, gazing at the sturdy 2-story structure. Solid foundation. He built everything on this property with his own hands, Beatrice replied, pride evident in her voice. Left Boston to start fresh after my mother died. Said Texas land had possibilities that the East never would. He wasn't wrong about that. Luke set down his empty plate. What happens if you can't pay those taxes? Beatrice stiffened. Sheriff Parker talks too much. Small towns, Luke shrugged. So what's your plan? Plant, grow, harvest, sell, pay the taxes. Simple as that. Simple as that, she confirmed, though they both knew it was anything but simple. The following days established a routine. They rose before dawn, worked until the heat became unbearable, rested during the worst of the afternoon sun, then continued until dusk. Luke proved to be knowledgeable about farming and showed Beatrice techniques her father had never taught her. You need to rotate your crops, he explained as they planted corn in the eastern field. Keeps the soil from wearing out. Next season, plant beans here. They put nitrogen back in the ground. My father always planted the same crops in the same fields, Beatrice argued. And how were his yields the last few years? Beatrice fell silent, remembering her father's increasing frustration with diminishing harvests. That's what I thought, Luke said, not unkindly. Farming's changing, Miss Montgomery. New methods, new thinking. A week passed, then 2. Beatrice found herself growing accustomed to Luke's presence, the way he whistled while he worked, his quiet competence, the respect with which he treated her father's land. Despite her initial reservations, she extended their arrangement indefinitely. One evening, as May turned to June, a sudden storm blew in from the west. They raced to secure the equipment and animals, rain pelting them as they worked. The roof, Beatrice shouted over the wind, pointing to the barn where shingles were coming loose. Without hesitation, Luke climbed the slippery ladder to the roof. Beatrice held the ladder steady, heart in her throat as she watched him work in the dangerous conditions. A particularly strong gust caught him off balance, and he slid several feet before catching himself on the edge. Luke! She screamed, forgetting formality in her fear. He managed to secure himself and finished nailing down the loose shingles before carefully descending. They rushed into the farmhouse, soaked to the skin and breathing heavily. "That was foolish," Beatrice admonished as she handed him a towel. "You could have broken your neck." "Wouldn't be the first time I've done something foolish," Luke replied with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. In the lamplight, Beatrice noticed a long scar running along his forearm, previously hidden by his shirt sleeves. "How did you get that?" Luke's expression closed. "War leaves its marks on everyone, Miss Montgomery. You fought in the war. You seem too young." "I was 16 when I joined up, lied about my age." He rubbed the scar absently. "Confederate Army, Texas Cavalry, not something I'm proud of anymore." "My father fought for the Union," Beatrice said quietly. Luke nodded. "I figured as much, him being from Boston." He looked at her directly. "Does that change things between us?" The question hung in the air, laden with meaning beyond the war's old divisions. Beatrice realized with sudden clarity that things had already changed between them, imperceptibly but undeniably. "No," she answered truthfully. "The war's been over for 13 years. We're building something new here." The storm raged outside, but inside the farmhouse, a different kind of tension built as they sat by the fire, drying their clothes. For the first time, Beatrice allowed herself to see Luke not just as hired help, but as a man, one whose presence had become increasingly important to her. The crops flourished under their combined care. By mid-June, green shoots covered the fields, promising a bountiful harvest if the weather held. Word of their success spread through Porterville, bringing unwanted attention. Beatrice was in town buying supplies when Harold Winters, the local banker, approached her. A corpulent man with cold eyes, Winters had been one of the interested parties the sheriff had mentioned. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted with artificial warmth. "I'm pleased to see you managing so well. I admit I had my doubts." "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Winters, but as you can see, it was unnecessary." "Indeed. I hear you've taken on help a drifter, I'm told." "Mr. Vaughn is an experienced farmer," Beatrice replied stiffly. Winters's smile tightened. "Curious that such an experienced man would accept room and board as payment. One wonders what he's running from." "I don't pay heed to gossip, Mr. Winters." "Perhaps you should, my dear. Porterville values its reputation. A young woman living alone with an unknown man, well, people talk." Heat flushed Beatrice's cheeks. "I fail to see how my arrangements are anyone's concern but my own." "Everything in Porterville is my concern," Winters replied, his genial mask slipping. "Especially land as prime as yours. My offer to buy stands. $500 more than enough to pay your taxes and start fresh somewhere more, suitable for a lady of your background. The land is not for sale, Mr. Winters. Now, if you'll excuse me." As Beatrice turned to leave, Winters caught her arm. "Consider carefully, Miss Montgomery. Texas can be dangerous for those without proper protection." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Beatrice pulled away, heart pounding as she hurried back to her wagon. The encounter left her shaken, confirming what she'd suspected: someone in Porterville wanted her land badly enough to intimidate her. When she returned home, Luke was repairing a fence in the north pasture. Seeing her troubled expression, he set down his tools. "What happened in town?" Beatrice related her conversation with Winters, watching Luke's face darken with anger. "Winters has been buying up land all around Porterville," Luke said. "Word is, the railroad's planning a new line through this area. Land values will triple once that happens." "How do you know this?" "Men talk freely in saloons, especially when they think no one important is listening." Luke's jaw tightened. "Winters doesn't seem the type to give up easily." "I won't be frightened off my own property," Beatrice declared, though her hands trembled slightly. Luke placed his hand over hers, the touch sending an unexpected warmth through her. You won't face him alone, Beatrice. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and neither of them acknowledged the shift, though both felt its significance. That night, Beatrice lay awake, troubled by Winters's threats and increasingly confused by her feelings for Luke. In just over a month, he had become essential not just to the farm's survival, but to her own sense of security. Yet she knew little about him beyond what he'd chosen to share. The following Sunday, Beatrice attended church in town as usual. Luke, who normally stayed at the farm during services, surprised her by offering to accompany her. "I haven't set foot in a church since before the war," he admitted as they drove the wagon toward town. "Figure it's past time." He had shaved and wore his one good shirt, his hair still damp from washing. Beatrice found herself sneaking glances at his profile, noticing the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow. Their arrival at the church caused a stir among the congregants. Women whispered behind their hymnals while men eyed Luke with suspicion. Beatrice held her head high, nodding politely to acquaintances as they found seats near the back. Reverend Miller preached about perseverance and faith, words that resonated with Beatrice's circumstances. Throughout the service, she was acutely aware of Luke beside her, his deep voice joining the hymns, his presence both comforting and unsettling. After the service, several parishioners approached them. Mrs. Peterson, the blacksmith's wife, was particularly forward. "Miss Montgomery, we've been concerned about you out there all alone," she said with a pointed glance at Luke. "If you need proper companionship, several of us ladies would be happy to take turns staying with you." Before Beatrice could respond, Luke spoke. "Miss Montgomery is hardly alone, madam. She has a foreman living on the property." "A foreman?" Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows rose. "I hadn't heard you were officially employed, Mr. Vaughn." "It's a recent arrangement," Beatrice interjected smoothly, catching Luke's surprised look. "Mr. Vaughn has extensive farming experience." The impromptu promotion seemed to satisfy some of the onlookers, lending legitimacy to Luke's presence at the farm. As they drove home, Luke was uncharacteristically quiet. "I apologize if I overstepped," Beatrice finally said, "calling you my foreman without discussing it first." "No need to apologize. It's a practical solution to wagging tongues." He glanced at her. "Though I'm not sure I've earned such a title." "You've more than earned it," Beatrice assured him. "The crops are thriving because of your knowledge. I'd be failing without you." Luke seemed about to say something more, then thought better of it. They continued in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken thoughts. As June turned to July, the summer heat intensified, making their work more challenging. They adapted by rising even earlier and working into the evening, often by lantern light. Despite the hardships, Beatrice found herself more content than she'd been since her father's death. One evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, a rider approached at a gallop. It was Tom Miller, the Reverend's son, his face grim as he reined in his horse. "Miss Montgomery, there's trouble. Winters has filed a claim against your property, saying your father took a loan last year that wasn't repaid." Beatrice stood, stunned. "That's impossible. My father never borrowed from Winters. He's got papers with your father's signature. Sheriff's already posted notice at the courthouse. You've got 3 days to disprove the claim or pay the alleged debt, $500. "This is outrageous," Luke said, stepping forward. "Joseph Montgomery wouldn't have borrowed money without telling his daughter." Tom shrugged helplessly. "Just thought you should know before the sheriff came out official-like. My pa says it doesn't smell right, but Winters has the law on his side with those papers." After Tom left, Beatrice paced the porch, fury and fear warring within her. "My father kept all his papers in his desk. If there was a loan, there would be a record." They searched the desk thoroughly, finding tax receipts, correspondence, and the deed to the property, but nothing regarding a loan from Winters. He's forged the documents, Luke concluded, but proving that will be difficult without witnesses or evidence. I'll go to the sheriff tomorrow, Beatrice decided. Surely he'll listen to reason. Sheriff Parker's a fair man, but he enforces the law as written. Without proof, our word against Winters won't be enough. Luke ran a hand through his hair, thinking. I know someone in San Antonio who might help a lawyer who specializes in land disputes, but it would take 3 days to get there and back. We don't have 3 days, Beatrice reminded him. Then we need another strategy. Luke's expression turned grim. I think it's time I had a conversation with Mr. Winters. No, Beatrice gripped his arm. That's exactly what he wants, an excuse to have you arrested or worse. He's already spreading rumors about your past. Luke's eyes met hers, a flash of vulnerability crossing his face. You've never asked about my past. It's yours to share or keep, she replied simply. His expression softened, and for a moment Beatrice thought he might reach for her. Instead, he stepped back, clearing his throat. Get some rest. We'll figure this out in the morning. But morning brought no solutions, only Sheriff Parker riding up to the farm with the official notice. He looked uncomfortable as he handed the document to Beatrice. I'm sorry, Miss Montgomery. I have to serve this by law, though between us, something doesn't sit right about it. My father never borrowed from Harold Winters, Beatrice insisted, scanning the document with growing horror. It claimed her father had taken a loan of $400 in December, with interest bringing the current amount to $500, exactly matching Winters's purchase offer. The signature looks genuine, the sheriff admitted. And there's a witness signature to Jasper Collins, Winters's clerk. It's forged, Luke stated flatly. Joseph Montgomery wasn't even in town last December. He was bedridden with pneumonia for 3 weeks. Beatrice nursed him herself. The sheriff looked thoughtful. That true, Miss Montgomery? Yes, Dr. Wallace attended him daily. My father didn't leave this farm from December 3rd until Christmas Day, and even then only to attend church. That's something we can verify, Sheriff Parker nodded. Dr. Wallace keeps detailed records. If your father was bedridden during the date on that loan document. December 15th, Beatrice confirmed, checking the paper. Then we have grounds to challenge it. I'll speak with the doctor today. The sheriff replaced his hat. Still, be prepared. Winters has influence with Judge Simmons. After the sheriff departed, Beatrice and Luke exchanged cautious looks of hope. It's a start, Luke said, but we need more. What if we could get Collins to admit the witness signature is false? Beatrice suggested. Luke considered this. Collins is weak-willed. Winters likely pressured him into signing, if confronted properly. Then we confront him, Beatrice decided, her determination hardening. Together, they rode into town that afternoon, heading straight for the bank. The clerk, a nervous young man with spectacles, blanched visibly when they entered. Mr. Collins, Beatrice approached the counter calmly. I'd like to discuss your witnessing of a loan between my father and Mr. Winters last December. Collins glanced toward the closed door of Winters's office. That is, all bank transactions are confidential, Miss Montgomery. Curious. Luke stepped forward, since Dr. Wallace confirms Joseph Montgomery was bedridden with pneumonia on December 15th, the date you supposedly witnessed him signing documents in this bank. Sweat beaded on Collins's forehead. Perhaps I misremembered the date. The document clearly states December 15th, Beatrice pressed. Were you present when my father signed it, Mr. Collins? The clerk's hands trembled. Mr. Winters will. Mr. Winters will face charges of fraud if this continues, Luke said quietly. Question is, will you face them alongside him, or will you tell Sheriff Parker the truth? The office door opened abruptly, and Harold Winters emerged, his face flushing with anger at the sight of them. "What's the meaning of this, Collins? I don't recall scheduling a meeting with Miss Montgomery." "We were just discussing the loan document you claim my father signed," Beatrice said evenly. "The one dated during his illness when he couldn't possibly have come to town." Winters's small eyes narrowed. "Your father's health is irrelevant. The document is legal and binding." "Not if it's forged," Luke countered. "And who might you be to make such accusations? A drifter with no standing in this community," Winters sneered. "I suggest you both leave before I have the sheriff remove you." "By all means, call the sheriff," Beatrice replied. "I'm sure he'd be interested in hearing Mr. Collins explain how he witnessed a bedridden man sign documents." Collins made a small, distressed sound. Winters shot him a warning look before turning back to Beatrice with a cold smile. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Montgomery. Even if you somehow invalidate this loan, there are other ways to acquire land from those who can't properly manage it." "Is that a threat, Mr. Winters?" Luke stepped forward, tension radiating from his tall frame. "Merely an observation, Mr. Vaughn, or should I say Lieutenant Vaughn?" Winters's smile widened at Luke's startled expression. "Oh yes, I've made inquiries about you. Confederate cavalry, court-martialed for disobeying orders, narrowly escaped execution. I wonder how the good people of Porterville would feel about such a man living among them." Beatrice glanced at Luke, whose face had gone pale beneath his tan. She had known there was more to his past than he'd shared, but this revelation stunned her. "My past has no bearing on Miss Montgomery's land claim," Luke said stiffly. "Perhaps not legally," Winters conceded. "But reputations matter in small towns. Miss Montgomery's is already precarious, harboring a man with your history." Beatrice had heard enough. "Come, Luke, we're finished here." Outside, Luke strode quickly toward their wagon, his expression closed and angry. Beatrice hurried to keep pace with his longer strides. "Luke, wait." He stopped but didn't turn to face her. "I should have told you." "Yes, you should have," she agreed, moving to stand before him. "But it doesn't change anything between us, doesn't it?" His blue eyes were troubled when they finally met hers. "I was court-martialed for refusing to fire on unarmed civilians. My commanding officer wanted to make an example of a town that had harbored Union sympathizers. I wouldn't do it." Beatrice felt something tighten in her chest, not disappointment, but a surge of admiration. "You did the right thing." "The Army didn't see it that way. I escaped before they could carry out the sentence and have been drifting ever since, staying nowhere long enough for my past to catch up." He looked away. "Now it has, and I've brought trouble to your door." "The trouble was already here," Beatrice reminded him. "Winters wants my land with or without you in the picture. But my presence gives him ammunition against you." Luke's hands clenched at his sides. "Perhaps it would be better if I left." "Better for whom?" Beatrice demanded. "Not for me, and certainly not for the farm. We're close to harvest, Luke. I need you." She hesitated, then added softly, "I want you to stay." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, followed by a warmth that made her heart beat faster. Before he could respond, they were interrupted by Dr. Wallace calling Beatrice's name from down the street. "Miss Montgomery, I've just spoken with Sheriff Parker about your father's condition last December. I've confirmed from my records that Joseph was indeed bedridden from December 2nd through the 23rd. I've signed an affidavit to that effect." Relief washed over Beatrice. "Thank you, Doctor. That should help our case enormously." "Don't celebrate yet," the doctor cautioned. "Winters has considerable influence with Judge Simmons. You'll need more than my testimony to prevail." "What about Collins?" Luke suggested. "If he admitted the truth?" Dr. Wallace shook his head. "Collins is Winters's creature through and through. He'd lose his position if he turned on his employer. They returned to the farm with mixed emotions, hope from the doctor's support, tempered by the reality of Winters's power in Porterville. That evening, they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the fields, the air heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Tell me about your life before the war," Beatrice finally said. "If you want to." Luke was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then softly, he began to speak of his childhood on a small farm near San Antonio, his parents who died of fever when he was 14, his decision to join the Confederate Army 2 years later. "I believed in the cause at first," he admitted, "or thought I did. By the end, I knew better." He described the horrors he'd witnessed, the slow realization that he was fighting for wealthy men's interests rather than any noble purpose. "After I escaped the court-martial, I wandered, worked ranches in Kansas, farms in Missouri, never stayed anywhere long." He glanced at her. "Until now." "Why did you stay?" Beatrice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke looked out at the darkening fields. "At first it was the land. Good soil, well tended, the kind a man could build a future on." His gaze returned to her face. Then it became something else entirely. The air between them seemed to still, the night sounds fading as Beatrice registered the meaning behind his words. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Luke was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. "Stay inside," he instructed, handing Beatrice her father's revolver. She ignored him, following him onto the porch as 3 riders came into view. In the moonlight, she recognized Sheriff Parker, along with 2 men she didn't know. "Evening, Miss Montgomery, Mr. Vaughn," the sheriff called as they approached. "Hope we're not intruding." "Not at all, Sheriff," Beatrice replied cautiously. "What brings you out so late? Information that couldn't wait." He dismounted, introducing his companions as Marshal Hayes and Judge Richardson from the county seat. "The judge has taken a special interest in your case, Miss Montgomery." Judge Richardson, a dignified man in his 60s, nodded politely. "Sheriff Parker's concerns about the loan document prompted me to intervene before Judge Simmons could rule. I've examined Dr. Wallace's affidavit and find it compelling. We've also had an interesting development," Marshal Hayes added. "Jasper Collins came to my office this afternoon, quite distressed. He's provided a written statement admitting he never witnessed your father sign any loan document." Beatrice gasped. "He confessed." "Apparently, your visit to the bank left him conscience-stricken," Sheriff Parker explained. "He claims Winters pressured him into falsifying the witness signature, threatening his position if he refused." "This is wonderful news," Beatrice exclaimed, instinctively reaching for Luke's hand. "It's enough to invalidate the loan claim," Judge Richardson confirmed. "However, I should warn you that Harold Winters is not a man who accepts defeat graciously. His ambitions in Porterville run deep. We'll post a deputy at your property for a few days," Marshal Hayes offered, "as a precaution." After the officials departed, promising to return the next day with formal documentation clearing the property claim, Beatrice and Luke remained on the porch, the enormity of their victory sinking in. "We did it," Beatrice breathed, turning to Luke with shining eyes. "You did it," he corrected. "Your determination saved this farm." "We did it together," she insisted. "I couldn't have managed without you, Luke, not just the farming but standing up to Winters." His eyes searched her face in the moonlight. "The judge was right about one thing: Winters won't give up easily." "Let him try," Beatrice said with newfound confidence. "This land is worth fighting for." "Yes," Luke agreed softly, "it is." Something in his tone made her heart quicken. Before she could lose her courage, Beatrice stepped closer, her hand finding his arm. "When you said you stayed because of something else entirely." Luke's other hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. "I stayed because of you, Beatrice. I think I knew it that first day, watching you fight that plow with more determination than sense." A laugh bubbled up from her chest, surprising them both. "I was quite terrible at it. Gloriously terrible," he agreed, smiling down at her. Then his lips were on hers, tentative at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. Beatrice had been kissed before chased. Proper kisses from Boston suitors, but nothing like this. This was like the Texas sun itself, warm and all-encompassing, promising life and growth and possibility. When they finally parted, Beatrice felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her world. The farm, her inheritance, suddenly meant more, not just her father's legacy, but potentially the foundation for something new. "I should probably confess," Luke murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "I've been falling in love with you since you extended my 1-week trial to indefinitely." "Is that so?" Beatrice smiled, her hands resting on his chest. "And here I thought it was my excellent cooking that kept you around." He laughed, the sound warming her more than the summer night. "Your cooking has improved considerably." "Careful, Mr. Vaughn," she warned playfully. "I'm still your employer." "About that," Luke's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking, your father's land, our land," she corrected impulsively, his eyes widened. "Beatrice, I've been thinking too," she continued, suddenly certain. "This farm needs more than a foreman, it needs a partner." Luke studied her face, searching for any doubt. "Are you certain?" "A woman in your position could have her pick of suitors with more to offer than a drifter with a troubled past." "I don't want a suitor," Beatrice replied firmly. "I want someone who sees this land the way I do, as something worth building on. Someone who works beside me, not above or below me." Luke's smile was slow and beautiful, transforming his entire face. "If you're proposing a partnership, Miss Montgomery, I accept." "Good," she whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him again. The next morning they awoke to the sound of approaching riders, far more than the expected deputy. Luke was outside first, rifle ready, as Beatrice joined him on the porch. A group of at least 10 men approached, Harold Winters at their head. Beside him rode Jasper Collins, looking miserable. "What's the meaning of this, Winters?" Luke called as they drew near. "Just a neighborly visit," Winters replied with false joviality. "It seems Mr. Collins has had a change of heart regarding his statement to the marshal." "Haven't you, Jasper?" The clerk nodded miserably, not meeting their eyes. "That's unfortunate," Beatrice said coldly, "but Judge Richardson has already invalidated your fraudulent claim." "Has he now?" Winters dismounted, several of his men following suit. "Well, perhaps we should discuss alternative arrangements." "I understand there was a fire in the county records office last night. Quite tragic. Many property documents were destroyed." Beatrice felt her blood run cold. "You wouldn't dare." "I dare many things, Miss Montgomery, when properly motivated." Winters gestured around at the farm. "This land will be part of the new Porterville, a thriving railroad town. Your little farm has no place in that future." "This isn't your land to plan." Luke stepped forward, positioning himself between Beatrice and Winters's men. "And if you think intimidation will change that, you're mistaken." Winters sighed theatrically. "Mr. Vaughn, surely a man with your colorful history understands how power works in the West. The strong take what they want, the weak lose what they have." "That wasn't my experience," Luke replied evenly. "I found that men who rely on bullying eventually meet someone who won't be bullied." "Is that a threat?" Winters's face darkened. "An observation," Luke countered. "Just as I observe that Sheriff Parker and Marshal Hayes are approaching from the South Road." All heads turned to see dust rising in the distance. Indeed, multiple riders were approaching rapidly. "This isn't over," Winters hissed, signaling his men to remount. "Railroad's coming whether you like it or not. Your pretty little farm won't stand in its way." They rode off, heading northeast to avoid crossing paths with the lawmen. Beatrice sagged with relief as Luke put an arm around her shoulders. "How did you know the sheriff was coming?" she asked. Luke grinned. "I didn't. But I figured Winters wouldn't be bold enough to attempt anything if he thought the law was on its way." "Clever man," Beatrice laughed, though the sound held a note of strain. "But what was that about a fire at the records office?" "Likely truth." Luke's expression sobered. "Winters is desperate. If he destroyed the records, proving ownership becomes more difficult for everyone, which creates opportunities for men like him." "My deed is in the house," Beatrice said, "but without county records to validate it." "We need allies," Luke decided. "Other landowners in similar positions. Together, we'd have more leverage against whatever Winters is planning." Over the next few days, they reached out to neighboring farms and ranches, discovering many shared their concerns about Winters and rumors of the railroad. A meeting was arranged at the Montgomery farm, bringing together a dozen property owners from around Porterville. Among them was Elijah Watson, whose ranch bordered their northern property line. The grizzled rancher had been Joseph Montgomery's friend and looked upon Beatrice with fatherly concern. "Your daddy would be proud seeing you fight for this land," he told her as they gathered in the barn, away from prying eyes. "But Winters ain't wrong about one thing: the railroad is coming. Southern Pacific has surveyors all through the county." "That doesn't give him the right to steal property," argued Samuel Green, a farmer from east of town. "No, but it gives him motive," Luke pointed out. "Land along the proposed route will be worth 10 times its current value." "Which is why we need to stand together," Beatrice addressed the group. "If Winters can target my farm with fraudulent claims, he can do the same to any of you, especially with the county records compromised." "What do you propose?" asked Martha Keene, a widow who ran a small orchard. "A landowners' association," Luke suggested. "Formally registered with both the state land office and the federal court in San Antonio. Each member would file their deeds in multiple locations, making it harder for someone like Winters to challenge ownership. We'd also agree to refuse individual buyout offers," Beatrice added. "Any negotiations with the railroad would happen collectively, ensuring fair terms for everyone." The idea gained traction as they discussed details. By evening's end, the Porterville Landowners Association was formed, with Elijah Watson elected president and Beatrice as secretary. As their neighbors departed, Watson lingered behind. "That young man of yours has a good head on his shoulders," he remarked to Beatrice. "Your father would have approved." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. "He's not exactly my young man, Mr. Watson." The old rancher chuckled. "Could have fooled me. The way you two work together, finish each other's thoughts, reminds me of me and the missus when we were starting out." His words stayed with Beatrice as she and Luke returned to their evening routine, somehow both familiar and charged with new awareness after their kiss 2 nights before. "Watson thinks we make a good team," she commented as they sat down to dinner. "Smart man," Luke replied with a smile. "Though I think he was implying more than our farming abilities." "He was," Beatrice admitted, meeting Luke's gaze across the table. "He said we reminded him of him and his wife when they were young." Luke's expression softened. "And what did you say to that?" "I said you weren't my young man," she replied honestly, "though I'm not sure that's true anymore." "What would make it true?" Luke asked quietly. Beatrice considered the question, understanding its importance. "Time, I suppose, knowing this isn't just circumstance bringing us together." Luke nodded thoughtfully. "That's fair. We've faced danger together, worked side by side. It creates a bond that might feel like something more." "Is that what you think it is?" Beatrice felt a pang of disappointment. "No." Luke's response was immediate and certain. "What I feel for you existed before winters threatened your land. It grows stronger every day, watching you fight for this place, seeing your strength and determination." He paused, searching for words. "But I understand your caution. I'm asking you to trust a man who spent years running from his past." "You're not running anymore," Beatrice pointed out. "You're building something here." Luke's smile was tentative but hopeful. "Yes, I am, or hoping to." The harvest season approached, their days filled with preparation and maintenance of equipment. The corn was nearly ready, the wheat following close behind. If all went well, the yield would more than cover the tax bill, with enough left to expand their planting next season. Their relationship evolved gradually, hands lingering during shared tasks, stolen kisses in the fields, conversations that stretched late into the night as they shared hopes and memories. Beatrice found herself falling deeply in love with this complex man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most. Word came from San Antonio that Judge Richardson had initiated an investigation into the county records fire, with Harold Winters as the primary suspect. Meanwhile, the Landowners Association grew in strength, drawing members from across the county as news of the railroad plans spread. August brought the harvest, and with it, the most grueling work of the year. They hired temporary hands from town, working from dawn until well after dusk to bring in the crops. Luke supervised the operation with quiet efficiency, earning respect from even the most skeptical workers. The yield exceeded their expectations, the result of Luke's modern farming techniques and favorable weather. As they calculated the profits, Beatrice felt a surge of triumph. $570, she announced, tallying the figures a second time to be certain. After paying the workers and setting aside for next season's seed, Luke whistled appreciatively. "That's a fine return, Miss Montgomery, more than enough for those taxes, and enough to consider some improvements," Beatrice added. "The irrigation system you suggested for the western fields, perhaps." "Thinking long-term," Luke observed with a smile. "I like that." "I am," she confirmed, meeting his gaze steadily. "Very long-term." The harvest celebration brought the entire community together on the Montgomery farm. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food contributed by neighboring families. A makeshift dance floor was constructed near the barn, and musicians from town provided lively tunes as the sun set on their successful season. Beatrice, dressed in her best blue gown, found herself the center of much positive attention, a marked change from the pitying or skeptical looks she'd received after her father's death. "You've won them over," Luke commented as he brought her a cup of cider. He looked handsome in clean trousers and a white shirt, his hair neatly combed. "We've won them over," she corrected. "Your farming expertise made this harvest possible." "Perhaps," he conceded, "but your courage in standing up to Winters impressed everyone." "You've become something of a local hero, Beatrice Montgomery." Before she could respond, Elijah Watson called for attention, raising his glass in a toast. "To Miss Montgomery and Mr. Vaughn," the rancher proclaimed, "whose successful harvest reminds us all what can be accomplished with determination and skill, and whose leadership in forming our association may well save all our lands from predatory interests." Cheers and applause followed, warming Beatrice's heart. As the music resumed, Luke held out his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Montgomery?" They moved onto the dance floor, Luke leading with unexpected grace as they joined other couples in a waltz. Beatrice was conscious of curious glances and approving smiles from the onlookers. "People are watching us," she murmured. "Let them," Luke replied, his hand warm at her waist. "I'm proud to be seen with you." As the evening progressed, Luke grew quieter, almost pensive. When the musicians took a break, he led Beatrice away from the crowd, toward the old oak tree at the edge of the yard. "Is something wrong?" she asked, concerned by his sudden seriousness. "No," he assured her, taking both her hands in his. "Just the opposite. Everything feels right for the first time in years." He took a deep breath. "Beatrice, these past months working beside you have been the happiest of my life." Her heart quickened at his earnest tone. "Mine too. When I came to Porterville, I was still running from my past, from responsibility, from putting down roots anywhere. I never expected to find a place that felt like home." He gazed at the farmhouse, the fields beyond. "Or someone who would make me want to stay forever." Beatrice felt tears gathering at the corners of her eyes as Luke knelt before her, still holding her hands. "I know I came to you as a drifter with nothing to offer but my labor," he continued, voice husky with emotion. "But if you'll have me, I promise to spend every day working to be worthy of you and this land we've tended together." "Luke," she began, but he pressed on. "Beatrice Montgomery, will you marry me? Not just as a practical partnership, though it would certainly be that too, but because I love you more than I thought possible, and I want to build a life with you on this land that means so much to us both." Tears spilled down her cheeks as joy bloomed within her chest. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Luke Vaughn, I will marry you." He rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms, their kiss sealing the promise between them. Applause erupted from nearby, and they turned to find their celebration had drawn an audience. Watson and several other neighbors watching with broad smiles. "About time," the old rancher called. "Now get back to your party, you two. This calls for another toast." Word of their engagement spread quickly through the gathering, bringing congratulations and well wishes from all sides. Even Sheriff Parker offered his blessing, along with news that Marshal Hayes had found evidence linking Winters to the records office fire. "He won't trouble you anymore," the sheriff assured them. "Judge Richardson has issued a warrant for his arrest. Winters fled town last night, headed for the territories." The threat that had hung over them for months was finally lifted. As the celebration continued around them, Beatrice and Luke found a quiet moment on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the fields that had brought them together. "I never imagined this," Beatrice admitted, leaning against Luke's shoulder. "When my father died, I thought my only choice was to save the farm or lose everything." "And now," Luke asked, his arm secure around her waist, "now I realize I've gained so much more than I was trying to save." She turned to face him, palm resting against his cheek. "A partner, a future, a love I wasn't looking for. Sometimes the best things find us when we're focused elsewhere," Luke replied, covering her hand with his own. "I came looking for work and found a home." The wedding took place in October, after the last of the harvest was sold and the fields prepared for winter. The ceremony in Porterville's small church was attended by nearly everyone in the county, the community having embraced their story as a symbol of hope and perseverance. Beatrice wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by Mrs. Peterson and the other town ladies, who had once whispered about her living arrangements but now counted themselves among her dearest friends. Luke stood tall and proud in a new suit, the haunted look that had once shadowed his eyes replaced by quiet confidence. Reverend Miller spoke of partnership and growth, comparing their union to the nurturing of land requiring patience, dedication, and faith in future harvests. As they exchanged vows, Beatrice thought of her father, wishing he could have known the man who would help carry on his legacy. Their first year as husband and wife brought challenges and triumphs. The railroad indeed came to Porterville, but thanks to the Landowners Association's united front, fair compensation was negotiated for affected properties. The Montgomery Vaughn farm, as it came to be known, benefited from increased access to markets without sacrificing acreage. Luke's modern farming techniques continued to improve their yields, while Beatrice's careful management of their finances allowed for steady expansion. They added a small orchard, additional livestock, and implemented the irrigation system that had once been merely a hopeful plan. In their second spring together, as they planted the eastern fields with corn, Luke paused to watch Beatrice adjusting the seeder. Her movements were confident and practiced now, a far cry from her struggles with the plow when they first met. "What are you staring at, Mr. Vaughn?" she called, noticing his attention. "Just admiring the view, Mrs. Vaughn," he replied with a grin. "And thinking how lucky I am that you were terrible at plowing." Beatrice laughed, the sound carrying across the fields they'd worked together. "Lucky for us both, though I maintain I would have figured it out eventually." "Undoubtedly," Luke agreed, walking toward her. "You're the most determined woman I've ever known. A necessary quality when dealing with stubborn husbands and Texas soil," she teased, accepting his kiss. As they resumed their work side by side, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from grief and uncertainty to partnership and love, from a woman desperate to save her inheritance to a couple building a legacy together. The land that had once been merely her father's final gift had become the foundation of their shared future, a future that expanded that summer with the news that their family would grow by one the following spring. Their son, Joseph Lucas Vaughn, was born in April 1881, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. Luke proved as adept at fatherhood as he had at farming, his gentle patience a perfect complement to Beatrice's protective instincts. As their child grew, so did their operation. The Montgomery Vaughn farm became known throughout the county for its innovative methods and consistent quality. Luke's expertise was sought by neighboring farms, while Beatrice's leadership in the Landowners Association helped shape the region's development as Porterville grew around the railroad. On the 5th anniversary of their meeting, they stood together on the porch at sunset, watching their son play in the yard that had once seemed too vast for Beatrice to maintain alone. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked, leaning into Luke's embrace. "If you hadn't stopped that day to comment on my poor plowing technique." Luke considered the question, his gaze taking in the prosperous farm they'd built together. "Sometimes, I might still be drifting, carrying the weight of my past. You might have lost this land to winters. Or found another way to save it," Beatrice suggested. "I was quite determined." "Indeed you were," Luke chuckled, "but I'm grateful things happened as they did." He placed a gentle hand on her middle where their second child was beginning to show. "This land gave us both a second chance." "The land," Beatrice agreed, "and each other." As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, watching their son chase fireflies in the yard, a child of the land they had fought for and nurtured together. The Montgomery Vaughn farm would continue to grow and change with the passing years, but its foundation remained the same. Two people who had found in each other the strength to build something lasting from determination and love. In the decades that followed, as Porterville transformed from frontier town to thriving community, their story became part of local lore: how a stubborn young woman refused to surrender her inheritance, how a drifter with a troubled past found redemption in honest work, and how together they created a legacy that would sustain generations to come. Their children grew up understanding the value of both the land beneath their feet and the partnership that had preserved it. Joseph and his younger sister, Emily, learned farming from their father and business from their mother. each developing skills that would serve the family enterprise as the 19th century gave way to the 20th. By the time Luke and Beatrice celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908, their modest farm had grown into one of the region's most prosperous agricultural operations. Modern machinery had replaced much of the backbreaking labor of their early years, and the railroad that Harold Winters had once schemed to control now carried Montgomery Vaughn produce to markets across the state. Through it all, they remained true to the principles that had guided them from the beginning: hard work, innovation, and unwavering commitment to each other. The love that had blossomed amid adversity deepened with each passing season, weathering droughts and floods, boom times and hardships. On warm summer evenings, long after their children had homes of their own and grandchildren played in the yard, Luke and Beatrice could still be found on the porch at sunset. His arm around her shoulders as they surveyed the land, they had transformed together the land that had, in its own way, transformed them. "We did good, didn't we?" Luke would sometimes ask, silver now threading through his sandy hair. And Beatrice, her own beauty matured but undiminished by the years, would invariably reply, "The very best, my love, the very best."